in chapter 10. Someone want to open us in prayer this evening? Someone? Anyone? I saw Blair's hand first. Well, just off the top of my head, Hester's are at camp this week. We just pray that they have a good week, it's a proper week. Fries are traveling. I'm just thinking of youth group. I know there's like lots of church-wide requests. I was just thinking of youth group. I think Cade's out of town as well. You want to pray for Cade? He's having a great time.
Just
oh. Pray that Cade comes back. Okay, Blair's going to lead us in prayer. Thank you.
All right. Dear Jesus, thank you for this day. I'm thinking that we would come to church tonight, Lord, and just learn more about you. I pray for the Fries and Kate as they're away. I just pray that you give them safety and help them to have a good time. And I also pray for the Hesters as they're at camp. I just pray that they'll learn a lot, Lord, and that they'll take in your word. And I pray that we have a good night. In your name I pray.
Amen. All right, thank you. John chapter 10. In your Bibles. The quick recap is that this isn't so much of a parable that Jesus is giving here, but it's more of like a figure of speech or a proverb. So that was the how I phrased it, okay? And so I just put all these up. This is what we talked about last week, okay? And so really this is we call it the parable of the shepherd. This is Jesus, one of the several I am statements that Jesus makes, and so we're going to look at those tonight. But not the most important part of the parable, but really as the priority is the sheep. Okay, so we talked through all that last week. There's the points that you can, hopefully you can see there, and just kind of get your brain back in gear. So the sheep are followers of Jesus. They're dependent on the shepherd, as we are supposed to be dependent on Jesus. The shepherds, or the sheep have a lot of enemies. That was where we spent a lot of time last week talking about in this proverb there are all these people that are mentioned that are in opposition to the sheep. So then we'll come to actually talking about Jesus, the Good Shepherd, tonight. So as we do that, I think what I'd like to do is just go ahead and take the time to read all the way through this. Okay. So what if we just started? What if we just started up front here? What if we just started up front, and we'll just work our way around? And if you don't want to read, just pass it on quickly to the next person, okay? So let's start in verse 1, and then let's actually read all the way down through verse 21. Okay, so we'll make it through a bunch of us tonight, okay? So start with Abby. You can skip. Just kidding.
This is my version, isn't it?
Okay, all right, so Abby, you start.
Get out.
I didn't think of that, but oh well. All right, so chapter 10, verse 1, and then we'll read all the way down through verse 21, okay?
Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that entereth not by the door into the sheepfold, but climbeth up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber.
But he that entereth in by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens, the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out.
When he has brought out all his, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice.
This parable spake Jesus unto them, but they understood not what things they were which he spake unto them.
Then said Jesus unto them again, Verily, verily, I say unto you, I am the door of the sheep.
All that ever come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. By me, if any man enter in, he shall be saved, and shall go in and out and find pasture.
The thief cometh not but for to steal and to kill and to destroy. I am come that they might have life, and that they might have it more abundantly.
I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep.
But he that is an hireling, and not the shepherd, whose own sheep are not, seeth the wolf coming, and leaveth the sheep, and fleeth. And the wolf catcheth them, and scattereth the sheep.
The hireling fleeth, because he is an hireling, and careth not for the sheep.
Somebody starts over there.
Oh, okay. 14.
Yeah,
I am the good shepherd, and know my sheep, and am known
As the Father knows me, even so know I the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep.
And other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, them also I must bring, and they shall hear my voice, and there shall be one fold and one shepherd.
Therefore doth my Father love me, because I lay down my life, that I may take it again.
No man taketh it from me, but I lay down of myself. I have power to lay down, and I have power to take it again. This commandment have I received of my Father.
There was a division, therefore, again among the Jews for these sayings.
Many of them said, He has a demon, and is insane. Why listen to him?
Others said, These are not the words of him that hath a devil. Can a devil open the eyes of the blind?
All right, very good. I know it's a long passage, and but I wanted us just to get the whole scope there, okay? We're not looking at every verse tonight because we've already looked at some of this last week as we kind of gave you the quick little recap here, okay? So this, I put all the terms there that are used, all these people that are in opposition in one way or another to the sheep, okay? And they, some of them represent specific people. One would be the hireling, let me put this, or the hired servant, okay? Which I believe Jesus is directing that towards the religious leaders of Israel, who should be caring for the people of Israel, but they are more interested in themselves, or more interested in self-preservation. So when Jesus comes along and has a message, that you think about it, it's a wonderful message for the people, but it goes against where the Pharisees and the Sadducees stand, and Jesus' message is a threat to them, and it's a threat to their status, it's a threat to their way of life and the way that they minister, okay? So, tonight, we'll focus on the point of the proverb, okay? And I know we talked a lot about the sheep and everything last week, but the whole point of the proverb is that he's trying to teach the people about himself, okay? The bulk of this is all about him and what he is trying to bring, what he's trying to teach the world, what he's trying to bring. Okay, so let's jump in here. And so this is the point of the proverb, okay? And hopefully we've already picked up that Jesus identifies himself as the good shepherd. Verse 11, he says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. There's a couple of different ways that I want to look at this, and we'll kind of just work our way back through the passage, okay? There's no confusion. Jesus is very emphatic throughout of who he is in this figure of speech that he's giving. He's very clear in saying, I am, I am, I am. Okay? So we'll start back at the beginning of the chapter here. You look at verse 2, the first thing I want us to be thinking about here is the authority of the shepherd. Okay? If you look at verse 2, he says, He that enters in by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the porter or the doorman opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. So right off the bat there, as Jesus starts off in verse 1, he says that people who should not have access to the flock are the ones who have to try and climb over the wall. Okay? The doorman, person who is in control of the flock, or who's watching the flock at night maybe, when he sees the shepherd coming, he opens the door for the shepherd because the shepherd is supposed to be there. The shepherd is his flock. He has the authority to be there. Did you win?
I don't know.
Oh. Were you up?
It's fine.
Oh, it's time. Okay, all right. Oh, man. Intense. Glad you're here. All right, there we go. That's good. Okay, very good. So the doorman, he's going to open the door for the shepherd because the shepherd is supposed to be there. It's his flock. Okay? So the shepherd, it's his flock. He has the authority over his flock. Okay? So notice, he enters through the door, and that signifies his authority. I think I put this in there, is that the porter or the doorman is not going to open to someone who doesn't have the authority to be I can't think of the word, which is right in front of my face here. He doesn't have authority to come into the flock. Okay, so the porter's only going to open the door for someone who's supposed to be coming in. Okay, that's the shepherd. Next, let's look at that he leads the sheep. And this will lead us into our next point. Okay, the shepherd has the authority, and he leads the flock. And the flock is going to follow him because he's their shepherd. And I'm kind of saying that in different ways, but that's the point that Jesus is making here. It's his flock. Okay? Here's a point to think about here. He leads the sheep, and I put on there, it signifies relationship. Let's look at what he says. Look back down at verse 3. It says, the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And when he puts forth his own sheep, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. So, by leading the sheep, that signifies that he has relationship with them. Okay? So he's not, also notice that as Jesus leads the flock, he's not a shepherd who is driving the flock somewhere. He's not behind the flock, nipping at their heels or using a whip on them or something like that and driving them. No, he's actually leading them, and the sheep are following him because they recognize him as the shepherd. So there's a difference there. He doesn't have to drive them. He leads them because they know him. So they'll follow him because they know him. All right? So, Jesus is the authority of his flock. And if you're a Christian, you're part of his flock. And so Jesus is your authority. He's your shepherd. If you're a Christian, Jesus is your shepherd in the word picture that he's giving here. So, that segues us into not just the authority, but the leading of the shepherd, okay? Let's work our way back over a little bit through these verses again, and then we'll drop down to verse 9. Here's something to talk about that Jesus makes a point here. Okay, look at verse 3. Again, it says, the sheep hear his voice. And then he calls his own sheep by name. He calls his own sheep by name. So think about that. Jesus knows, he knows every single one of his sheep individually. Now, we could do a deep dive down that, but let's keep the focus on Jesus here. Because why do you think about this? As Jesus is teaching them here, does he just say this offhand? Or does he say that on purpose? That he knows his sheep by name? It's a little bit rhetorical because he's saying that on purpose. Jesus knows his sheep and he knows them individually. And again, if you're a Christian, you're one of Jesus' sheep. That means that Jesus knows you individually. Yes, it's that we are all his children, we're all followers of Christ. But you think about that, just pause and think about that for a minute. Maybe even say that in your head for a second. Jesus knows me. He knows everything about me. He knows everything I've done in the past. Jesus knows everything that I did today. Jesus knows what I'm going to do tomorrow. He knows what I'm going to do tonight. He knows how I'm going to be living years from now. Jesus knows us individually. And he cares for us individually. That's a little point to think about in there. Why does Jesus know his sheep individually? Because he loves his sheep individually. It's not just a collective, oh, God loves everybody. But no, God specifically loves you. There's a singular aspect there that Jesus points out here. And I want us to think about that. That's something that I know I need to think about more. That God knows me. He knows me individually. And he still loves me individually. Much more than I can know and I can realize. Despite how I've treated him over and over. He still loves me more than I can realize. Let's think about that for a moment. So he knows every single one of his sheep individually. Let's drop down to verse 9 here. We talk about the fact that Jesus leads his sheep. What I want to emphasize here is that Jesus perfectly leads his sheep. Okay? Jesus leads his flock in the best way possible. It cannot get any better than Jesus doing it and God doing it, right? And he leads them to the best pastures. Let's look at verse 9. We'll talk about the fact that he calls himself the door. We'll come back to that in a moment. But he says, I am the door. By me, if any man enter in, he shall be saved and shall go in and out and find pasture. We'll key in a little bit deeper here on verse 10. But at the end of verse 10, Jesus says that I am come that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly. The way that Jesus leads us is, it cannot get any better than that. Think about that. Why do sheep have to be herded? Because they're stupid. Okay. It's not saying we're stupid. However, do we just know where we're supposed to go? I mean, think a little bit the big picture in life. Do we know all the right decisions to make? Do we even know what's right and wrong on our own? Do we know what to do with our life? Do we know how to treat people on a day-to-day basis? And you think about that. I mean, much of that, people can live apart from God and kind of live a moral-ish life if the culture around them shapes them a little bit. But for someone to live life in the best way possible, it takes guidance from God. It takes the leading of God. And so Jesus, as the good shepherd, he perfectly leads his sheep. And he leads us in the best way possible. He leads us to the best pastures there are. He knows everything that we need. He has it all perfectly taken care of. We just need to follow him. Let's keep moving here, okay? This is where it changes a little bit, okay? Look at verse 11. It says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. Oh, wait a second. As Jesus is giving this figure of speech, think about how that would have sounded to the people right there listening. Jesus says the good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. Now some of this, much of this would have, in some regard, maybe making some sense. You can draw the application, the parallels, but then all of a sudden you get to this, the shepherd gives his life for the sheep. Now, we could, try and play devil's advocate, make the case here a little bit that, if a shepherd, he has his flock, think a human shepherd with his human flock, and if his flock is going to get attacked, the shepherd cares about his sheep, so he's going to defend his flock, okay? But if it gets down to it, let's say things are in a bad way. You got your flock of sheep, and then a pack of wolves comes, and let's say there's a dozen of them, and it's just you as the shepherd. Yeah, you're probably going to try and defend your flock. Maybe you have some really good connections with those sheep. You know most of them by name. You really care about them. You've raised them up from the little lambs, okay? And you raise them up to now they're big sheep, and so you care about them so much. But when it comes down to it, a shepherd's going to defend his flock, and maybe a shepherd will even go down fighting, okay? But is a shepherd going to, a human shepherd, going to give up his life so that his flock can survive? Probably not. So that's where this figure of speech that Jesus is giving, this proverb, he takes a sharp turn with it. He says, I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. So this is where we'll talk about, get it up on the screen here. This is the love of the shepherd, okay? This is where things change, all right? Because he lays down his life. Look at verse 15. We read verse 11. Look down at verse 15. He repeats it. He says this several times. He says, as the Father knows me, even so know I the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. So Jesus is he's really taking a turn here in how he is explaining this and the point that he's trying to make. So as the good shepherd, okay, we realize this. If you're a Christian, then you understand this, okay? okay? If you've heard the Bible, then you understand this. You've heard the gospel, this makes sense. That Jesus took our place. So Jesus took the punishment that we were supposed to bear, okay, for sinning against God. Jesus took that punishment. He laid down his life. He set it down. He set it aside for us. And so Jesus has done that for his flock. He did that for your redemption. He did that so that you and I can be reconciled to God. And Jesus even says later, if you go to chapter 15, Jesus points out that's sacrifice is the highest form of love that we can come up with. Jesus says in John 15, there's no greater love than this, than a man, what? That's what I was going to say. I heard it. Lay down his life for his friend. Thank you. Thank you for whispering it. Okay. And that's even, you think about it in like military terms, someone pretty much can't win the Medal of Honor unless they've put their life on the line for others. And often the Medal of Honor is awarded posthumously. After the fact, meaning that person died in the line of duty, sacrificing themselves for the good of the people around them, the good of their fellow soldiers. And so that we even recognize that's like the highest form of sacrifice, is when someone will give up their life for someone else. And that's what Jesus did for us, is he gave up his life for us. So Jesus, as the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. So now I want you to notice here, and maybe you started to pick up on this, that as you get towards the end of this, and really even picking up into verse 15, that as Jesus nears the end of his figure of speech here, his thought gets bigger, and like the scope of what he's talking about gets bigger. Okay, so let's look at that here then. Okay, starting in verse 15, let's talk about the obedience of the shepherd. Jesus says in verse 15, "As the Father knows me, even so know I the Father." Okay, let's pause there for a second. Why does Jesus bring up the Father here? He hasn't, up until verse 15, he hasn't brought the Father up yet. So why does he bring up God the Father here? You want to take a stab at that? As the Father knows me, even so know I the Father. Anybody have a thought? Megan?
Maybe just to say I'm not just a prophet.
Perfect. Good. That's a great way to put it. Max, do you have anything to add? That's why I can go up.
I was going to say that they're like the same people.
Good. Good. Excellent. Excellent. Well put. Okay. I put it like this, and this, I think it's just a different way of saying what you guys said, is that the Father and Son are in perfect harmony. Jesus isn't just some prophet, some man who's on earth on his own. He's there in perfect harmony with the Father, in God's will. We'll talk about that here a little bit more in just a moment. So Jesus is constantly reminding people that he is sent from God and that he is God. He's the same as God. And we'll talk about that next week as well. So he even gets a little bit bigger in scope as he goes on to the next verse. Let's look at verse 16. Look at verse 16. He says, "And other sheep I have, which are not of this fold. Them also I must bring, and they shall hear my voice, and there shall be one fold and one shepherd." What in the world is Jesus talking about in verse 16? That's the question. Yes, Jacob. Okay, good. He's talking about Gentiles. Okay? This is going to come up. Think about tonight's lesson and in regards to Sunday morning. If you will spoil it for Sunday morning, pastor's sermon. We were comparing notes anyways today. It just worked out. How did the Jews view the Gentiles? Let's start there. Next.
They thought they were like disgusting and that they didn't want to be around them, and they had to wash themselves before they touched anything that the Gentiles had touched.
Right. Very good. Very good. The Jews very much treated the Gentiles with disdain. And so here's Jesus in this figure of speech, in this proverb, and now he brings the Gentiles into it. So what's he doing here? I put it like this, is that he's giving a little glimpse of God's plan for a large flock. It's not just about Jews. It is just about people. And in all honesty, the Jewish people should have an idea of this. Okay, because go back all the way back to when God first talked to Abraham, and that'd be in Genesis chapter 12. When God first talked about Abraham, and he's kind of giving Abraham a little glimpse of the future, and he even talks about through Abraham's lineage, and he's talking about Jesus, through Abraham's lineage, all nations of the world will be blessed. And so all the way back to the beginning, it was never just about the Jewish people. It was always about God's plan for anyone to be able to come to him. That's why he says, those people I must also bring, and they shall hear my voice, and there shall be one fold or one flock, and there will be one shepherd. So in going right along with that, okay, salvation of everyone, all who will believe, has been part of God's plan since before he created the world. And so that also means that Jesus' sacrifice has been a part of God's plan. Okay, we're almost done here, so stick with me for just a few more minutes. Look at verse 17. So he says, therefore does my Father love me, because I lay down my life that I may take it again. So God's plan is for people to be saved, for all people who believe to be saved. And God's plan since before he created the world has been for Jesus to take the punishment that we deserve. I mean, this has been a long time coming. And Jesus, so it's like, that's where I say Jesus is like getting bigger and bigger with the thought that he is giving to the people here. So let's back up here and let's talk a little bit about Jesus' statement about the door. We haven't talked about that yet. And I didn't differentiate it too much because to me it's really talking about, Jesus says, I am the door, and he says, I am the good shepherd. And he's really just talking about the same, he's talking about himself. And the door and the shepherd are really kind of a little bit interchangeable, if you will. Okay? So let's talk about this, the power and the protection of the shepherd. I put that into, if you're taking notes, it's all in one point there. Okay, let's talk about the protection. Verse 7, Jesus says, verily, verily, I'm telling you the truth. I say unto you, I am the door of the sheep. Look at verse 9. He states it again. I am the door. By me, if any man enter in, he shall be saved, and shall go in and out and find pasture. Okay, here's the idea with the doors. The door has the idea of protection. And I've always wondered why Jesus calls himself the shepherd here, and then he also calls himself the door. Well, depending on how you look at it, if you have, think about a shepherd keeping his flock, way out in the country, okay, and maybe he'll build up almost like a little rock fence or something like that, something where he can keep the sheep enclosed at night. When it comes to the entryway to that little fence, instead of having a gate, the shepherd himself would actually make that his little camping spot. And so the shepherd would sleep at the door of the sheepfold, okay, of that fenced-in enclosure. So nothing is getting in and out without him knowing. He's in control. He's protecting the sheep, and that's where he sleeps all night long, or maybe sits up awake if he's hearing noises out there, and he's hearing maybe that there's threats to the sheep. He's going to be right there at the entrance so that no one gets out, everyone's safe, and no one gets in. All the sheep inside are safe. So the shepherd and the door are the same person, okay? And so Jesus provides that protection for his flock. Nothing is going to touch his flock that he doesn't allow. All right, so little thought there. Now let's talk about here, still on the door, okay? By the door, the sheep have access. The sheep have the protection inside the sheepfold. They also have the access to come out and to find pasture, as he says, okay? So they have the access both to the flock and then both to the pastures that the shepherd leads them to, okay? All right, what time we got? 8:11. Okay, all right. We gotta fire through this when we get on here, okay? Whew. All right. The power to give abundant life. So there's protection and then there's the power, okay? Look at verse 10. Just a couple more verses, then we'll be done here, okay? He says, the thief comes not but for to steal and to kill and to destroy. I am come that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly. Jesus as the shepherd, and Jesus is stated as God, he's the one who can give life, and it's not just eternal life, okay? And it's not just the good life. Jesus, and he says this word, I'm coming that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly. He makes a point there of saying more abundantly. What does abundant mean? Max, again.
A lot of something.
A lot of something, okay? You say abundance, that means a lot. Okay, so it has the idea of overflowing, has the idea of surpassing, it has the idea of more than is necessary, abundance, more than you need. In that Jesus provides eternal life, and he also provides life here on earth. And it is so much more than we can imagine. The best thing that we can come up with, the ultimate life here on earth that we can come up with, Jesus provides so much more than that. Whatever we think maybe the best life is. And even eternity. It's hard to imagine like eternity and what heaven will be like, even from what Scripture tells us. Jesus gives life, and he gives it in abundance, more than we need, better than we can think of. It's the power to give abundant life. And here's maybe the clincher, is the power of resurrection. All the way down in verse 18, talking about his life, Jesus says, no man takes it from me, but I lay it down of myself. There's that idea of sacrifice again. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it again. This commandment have I received of my Father. So Jesus is the power of resurrection. All right, we got to wrap up here. There's a lot that I'm skipping over here. Sorry. Let's just leave it on this, okay? Now, if you're a Christian, Jesus is your shepherd. And you have the opportunity to know him. I have the opportunity to know him as much as I want. And he can lead me, if I let him, if I follow him, he will lead me in the best way as possible for me. So, am I being, or are you being, responsive and following the shepherd this week, tomorrow, today? Am I following the shepherd today, right now? All right, we got to wrap it there. We're going to go over time if we aren't already. So it's some things to think about, hopefully, and some application to make in your heart. Okay, let's pray.